Imagine getting a text from your husband saying he's working late, only to find him standing at the altar, marrying your best friend in a church ceremony. Yeah, that happened to me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Laura Miller. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a nurse. I had been married to Rick for 7 years. He was 34, working as a corporate manager, the kind of man who wore suits every day and loved the stability of his job. From the outside, we looked like a solid couple. People thought we were happy, and for the longest time, I believed that too. There was another person who had been by my side long before Rick entered the picture. Her name was Vanessa Carter. She was my childhood best friend, the girl I grew up with, the one who knew every secret, every heartbreak, every silly crush I ever had. We went through school together, college years together, and even after marriage, she was still the one I turned to for advice. She was like a sister to me, the one person I thought would never betray me. I trusted them both without hesitation. Rick was my husband, the man I promised to love through everything. Vanessa was my best friend, the woman I thought would stand by me through every stage of life. I never imagined those two people, the two I cared for the most, would be the ones to cut me the deepest. For years, life felt normal. I worked long shifts at the hospital, came home tired, and Rick would be there with dinner sometimes, or we would order takeout. Vanessa would drop by on weekends, and we would talk for hours about work, family, and dreams we still carried. There was nothing unusual about any of it. Nothing that screamed betrayal. If someone had told me back then what would happen, I would have laughed in their face. Because how could I believe it? Rick and I had shared anniversaries, vacations, long nights planning our future. Vanessa had been the maid of honor at my wedding. She gave a toast about how Rick and I were made for each other, how she had never seen me so happy. It all seemed real. Looking back, maybe there were small signs I ignored. A late meeting here, a canceled coffee date there. But life was busy, and I didn't want to second-guess the people I trusted. I thought love and friendship were safe. I thought the people closest to me were exactly who they claimed to be. I was wrong. That trust, that comfort I carried for years, was about to shatter in the most brutal way I could imagine. And when it broke, it wasn't just my marriage on the line. It was the loss of a friendship I had held on to my whole life. It was the moment everything I thought I knew about loyalty collapsed in front of me. It began slowly, the kind of changes you almost convince yourself don't matter. Rick started working late more often. He used to come home at a regular time, but suddenly there were meetings that stretched late into the night. He would say, "Don't wait up," or "I'll grab food on the way home." At first, I believed him. I knew his job was demanding, but soon the pattern became too consistent. There were also the phone calls. He would step into another room when his phone rang. Sometimes he would lower his voice, other times he would walk outside. When I asked who it was, he always had the same answer: just work. He said it so quickly, like he was shutting the door before I could ask again. I wanted to believe him, but a part of me felt uneasy. At the same time, Vanessa began to change too. She had always been the one to call me up with last-minute coffee plans, or to stop by after work. Suddenly, she was busy. She canceled on me with excuses that didn't make sense. Once she said she wasn't feeling well, but I saw a picture of her out with other friends the same day. Another time she said she had to work late, but I knew her job didn't require evening hours. I told myself I was being paranoid. Work stress could explain Rick's behavior. Vanessa might just be in a different phase of life. People get busy, right? I repeated those thoughts to myself over and over. But no matter how much I tried to silence it, something inside me kept whispering that there was more to it. The part one couldn't ignore was how their absences lined up. If Rick was working late, Vanessa was suddenly too tired to see me. If she canceled dinner, Rick was gone until midnight. I tried to find reasons, but the timing was too perfect. Once or twice could have been a coincidence, but when it kept happening, the coincidence excuse started to fall apart. I began watching more closely, not because I wanted to, but because my instincts pushed me to. I noticed Rick being protective over his phone, setting it face down, and even carrying it into the bathroom. Vanessa, who used to share everything with me, avoided talking about her personal life altogether. Whenever I asked questions, both of them became vague, almost defensive, like they didn't want me digging deeper. I didn't have proof, but the feeling was there. Heavy, constant, impossible to shake off. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, telling myself I was imagining things. But in the morning, the unease was still there, pressing on me, reminding me that something wasn't right. It reached the point where I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whether I liked it or not, I had to start paying attention. The people I trusted most were hiding something, and I needed to find out what it was. One Friday night, Rick sent me a text. It was short, the kind of message I had seen too many times before. Working late, don't wait up. I stared at the screen longer than usual, my chest tightening in a way I couldn't explain. Something in my gut told me this wasn't just another night of overtime. I tried to shake it off, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave. After pacing around the house, I grabbed my keys and decided to drive. At first, I told myself I was just going to clear my head, maybe grab a coffee. But halfway to the cafe, another thought crossed my mind. What if I drove past his office? Maybe if I saw his car parked outside, I could calm down and stop torturing myself with doubts. When I reached the building, my heart sank. The parking lot was nearly empty, and Rick's car wasn't there. I parked for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, hoping I had just missed it. But no, it wasn't there. He wasn't inside. My mind began to race, filled with questions I didn't want answers to. I didn't know where to go next. My hands kept turning the wheel, my body on autopilot as I drove aimlessly through the streets. Every turn felt heavy, my pulse racing with each mile. It was like something was pulling me forward, like I was heading somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. That's when I noticed a row of cars parked outside a church. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then I saw the decorations, flowers, ribbons, soft lights glowing through the windows. A wedding. My stomach dropped. I pulled over across the street, my eyes locked on the church doors. People were milling about, dressed formally, smiling, chatting. I sat frozen, my fingers digging into the steering wheel. A strange thought hit me. What if Rick was here? It didn't make sense, but the unease in my chest grew heavier with every passing second. Something pushed me to get out of the car. I moved slowly, my legs trembling as I walked closer. The sound of music carried out faintly from inside. Laughter followed, the kind of laughter that belonged at a celebration, not a late night at work. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone around could hear it. I reached the doors and peeked inside, my breath catching instantly. The sight in front of me stole every word from my mouth. The aisle was lined with flowers, the pews filled with guests. At the altar stood Rick, in a tuxedo, looking calm and composed. And walking down the aisle toward him was Vanessa, dressed in white. My knees nearly gave out. I held onto the doorframe, trying to breathe, but the world blurred in front of me. The man who had promised me forever and the friend who had promised me loyalty were right there, side by side, in a moment meant for two people in love. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was stand there, silent, as my worst fear unfolded before my eyes. I pushed the door open just enough to step inside. My hands shook as I held it, afraid it might slam shut and draw attention to me. The church was quiet except for the soft music playing in the background, and every sound echoed through the space. My breath caught in my throat the moment my eyes reached the front. There he was. Rick, my husband, dressed in a black tuxedo, standing tall at the altar. He looked calm, even happy, as if this was the most natural place for him to be. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I was dreaming, that maybe exhaustion from my long shifts had caught up with me. But the scene in front of me was too vivid, too sharp. Then I saw her. Vanessa. She walked slowly down the aisle in a white dress, her face glowing with a smile I had never seen before. Every step she took felt like a knife cutting deeper into me. This wasn't some stranger. This was the girl who had shared my childhood, the friend who had once cried with me over heartbreaks, the one I trusted with every secret. And there she was, dressed as a bride, walking toward the man who was supposed to be my husband. It wasn't a grand wedding with hundreds of guests. It was small, intimate. The pews weren't packed, only a handful of people sat scattered inside, clapping softly and smiling. The simplicity of it made it worse. It was personal, private, something they had planned carefully, away from the eyes of those who might know the truth. Away from me. I felt the ground slip from under me. My heart pounded, my chest tightened so hard it was painful. I wanted to scream, to run down the aisle and demand answers, but my body wouldn't move. I stood frozen, like the air had been stolen from my lungs. When Vanessa finally reached him, Rick took her hands like it was the easiest thing in the world. The minister's voice droned in the background, but I couldn't hear the words. My ears rang with the rush of blood, my mind spinning too fast to catch a thought. The only thing clear was what I was seeing with my own eyes. They smiled at each other. They exchanged vows. The same man who had promised me forever was now promising it to her. I felt like I was watching a life that should have been mine being handed to someone else, someone who had stolen it piece by piece behind my back. And then the final blow came. Rick leaned forward and kissed her. The room erupted in soft clapping. People smiled. But for me, the world ended in that single moment. I turned my head away, unable to watch any longer. My hands trembled so hard I thought I might collapse right there in the aisle. It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. My husband had just married my best friend. I didn't stay long enough to hear the rest. My body moved on its own, quietly turning back toward the doors. I slipped out of the church without anyone noticing, each step feeling heavier than the last. The night air hit me, cold and sharp, but it wasn't enough to wake me from the shock. I got into my car, closed the door, and sat there in silence. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel just to steady them. I didn't cry, not then. I couldn't. My mind was too numb, my body too frozen to release the pain. Instead, I sat staring at the windshield, unable to process what I had just seen. The images replayed in my head over and over, the tuxedo, the white dress, the kiss. Every detail carved itself into my memory like it was burned there forever. Eventually, I drove home. The house felt colder than usual when I walked in. I went straight to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared into the dark. That's where the memories came flooding in. 7 years of marriage. Vacations we took, dinners we cooked together, nights we laughed until we fell asleep. And before that, years of friendship with Vanessa. Secrets we shared, dreams we built, promises we made to each other as kids. All of it unraveled in one night. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. It wasn't just that Rick cheated. It wasn't just that Vanessa lied. It was that the two people I trusted most in this world chose to betray me together. My husband and my best friend. The two people who should have been standing beside me, protecting me, loving me, turned out to be the ones destroying me behind closed doors. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash every photo in the house, tear down every memory we had built. But instead, I stayed still. A strange calmness washed over me, one that didn't come from peace but from something darker. I realized I wasn't going to collapse, and I wasn't going to beg for explanations either. They had made their choice, and now I would make mine. Lying awake through the night, I thought about what I needed to do. Not just to survive this, but to take control of it. They expected me to break down, maybe even disappear quietly while they built a new life together. But that wasn't going to happen. By the time the sun came up, I had made myself a promise. I wasn't going to scream at them. I wasn't going to chase after the truth they had already shown me. Instead, I was going to move carefully, silently, and with purpose. I whispered it into the empty room, almost like an oath. They won't see me coming. The morning after that night, I woke up with my mind set. The shock was gone, replaced with a cold determination. If Rick and Vanessa thought they could lie to me and walk away untouched, they were wrong. I wasn't going to scream at them or beg for answers. I was going to gather the truth in a way they couldn't deny. I started with the things closest to me, our finances. Rick had always handled the bills, but I had access to the accounts. I logged in and went through every statement, every transfer. That's when I noticed something strange. Money was being moved regularly into an account I didn't recognize. The amounts weren't huge, but they were steady, like he was feeding it carefully, so I wouldn't notice. When I traced the account details, my stomach turned. The name on it was connected to Vanessa. It didn't stop there. I went through his email, something I had never done before. Buried in old folders were messages that confirmed everything I already knew in my gut. Plans for business trips that were really weekends away. Receipts for hotels that were never meant for me. Notes between them that made it clear this had been going on far longer than I wanted to imagine. Vanessa had used me all along. All those times she canceled plans or made excuses, she wasn't just avoiding me. She was making sure she had a clear path to be with him. She played both sides perfectly. To my face, she was the friend who cared about me. Behind my back, she was the woman taking everything I had. I didn't let the pain distract me. Instead, I started documenting. I printed bank records, copied emails, saved receipts. I even went further. I remembered a guest at the wedding who had taken photos outside the church. It wasn't hard to track them down. A quiet conversation and a little bit of money later, I had pictures in my hand, Rick and Vanessa together, smiling at the altar, proof of everything. Each piece of evidence felt like a weapon I was storing away. I wasn't rushing to use it. That wasn't the plan. I wanted everything in order, everything undeniable. If I confronted them without proof, they could twist the story, make me seem crazy or bitter. But with the documents, the records, the photos, they couldn't run from it. I sat at my desk one night, looking at the stack of papers and files I had gathered. My hands shook, but not from fear anymore. It was power. For the first time since that night, I felt like I wasn't the one being blindsided. They thought they had destroyed me quietly. What they didn't know was that I was building something much stronger in silence. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, "It's almost time." I didn't rush into it. I waited for the right night, when Rick came home at a normal hour, acting like nothing in the world was wrong. He kissed me on the cheek, set his briefcase down, and asked what was for dinner as if we were still the same couple we used to be. I smiled, played along, and set the table. The whole time, my heart was steady. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind over and over. I wanted him to look me in the eye before I tore down the lies he had built. We sat across from each other, eating quietly. After a few bites, I spoke, my voice calm. "So," I said, "how was your late night at work the other day?" He didn't flinch. He didn't even pause to think. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Busy. Just catching up on reports. You know how it is." His words were smooth, practiced, the same tone he had probably used 100 times before. Inside, I felt the anger rise, but I didn't let it show. I only gave a small nod, like I believed him. Then, without another word, I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the photo I had hidden there. I slid it across the table toward him. It was the picture from the wedding. Rick in a tux, Vanessa in white, the two of them holding hands at the altar. His fork clattered onto the plate. His face went pale. For the first time in all these months, he had nothing to say. His mouth opened, then closed again, like the words were caught in his throat. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. I hope she was worth 7 years of my life. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. He tried to speak, but the words came out broken. "Laura, it's not, you don't understand." I almost laughed at that. Not understand. I had the photo in front of me. I had the records, the emails, the proof. I understood perfectly. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back before he could touch me. The man sitting across from me wasn't my husband anymore. He was a liar, a coward who thought he could keep both of us in his world without consequence. I stood up, taking my plate to the sink as if the conversation was over. Behind me, he kept stammering, trying to come up with an explanation that didn't exist. I didn't care to hear it. That night wasn't about his excuses. It was about me showing him that I knew everything, that the mask he had been wearing was gone for good. He thought he had hidden the truth well. But now, the lies were in the open, and there was no turning back. Rick tried to recover after that night, but the more he spoke, the more pathetic he sounded. He sat at the table with his head in his hands, muttering excuse after excuse. "It wasn't real," he said. "It was a mistake. I was pressured. You don't understand, Laura, it just happened." I stood there listening, not because I cared, but because I wanted to see how far he would go to twist the truth. Every word made him look smaller. He couldn't even admit what he had done. He wanted to rewrite it, as if I hadn't stood in that church and seen it with my own eyes. I let him talk until he ran out of breath. Then I laughed, not the kind of laugh that comes from humor, but the kind that comes from disbelief and pain. It cut through his excuses and left him sitting in silence. I walked to my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out a folder. Inside were the divorce papers I had already prepared. I placed them in front of him, the way he had once placed his lies in front of me. "Sign them," I said. My voice was calm, steady, almost too quiet. "We're done." His face twisted in shock. He begged me to listen, to give him another chance, but I had already made my choice. There was no saving this marriage, not after the betrayal, not after 7 years of trust had been shattered. He reached for me, but I stepped back and walked out of the room, leaving him with the papers that would end everything. Not long after, Vanessa called. Her voice cracked through the line, begging me to hear her out, to let her explain. I didn't give her the chance. I blocked her number without a word. There was nothing she could say that would erase what she had done. She had stood in front of a church and stolen the life I built. No apology or excuse could undo that. Word spread quickly. Family heard, friends found out, and soon everyone knew. Rick and Vanessa's names became whispers in conversations, pointed stares in gatherings. People who once respected them shook their heads in disgust. They were exposed for what they were, a cheating husband and a backstabbing best friend. I didn't speak much during this time. I didn't need to. The evidence I had collected was enough. The pictures, the records, the undeniable proof. It spoke louder than I ever could. I stayed silent while they stumbled under the weight of their own choices. And that silence hurt them more than any scream ever could. Rick and Vanessa were left to deal with the humiliation on their own, while I walked forward with my head high. They thought they had destroyed me, but all they had done was destroy themselves. The papers were signed, and with them, the last thread tying me to Rick was cut. But I didn't walk away empty-handed. I had been careful, patient, and deliberate. While he wasted his time sneaking around, I had been protecting myself. The house was in both our names, but I made the choice to sell it. The memories inside those walls were poisoned anyway. I took my share of the money and walked away, free from the place where every lie had been told. The bank accounts were next. I only touched what was legally mine, nothing more, nothing less. But what was mine was enough to keep me secure. Rick had leaned on me for years without realizing it. My steady income had paid for more than he ever admitted. Without it, he was exposed, just a man who couldn't stand on his own. When I drained what I could take, he was left scrambling. Rick thought Vanessa would be his safety net, but she quickly discovered the truth. The man she chose wasn't the strong, successful husband she had dreamed about. He was bitter, broke, and angry. The money he once had access to was gone, and so was the woman who had quietly carried him for years. Vanessa got what she wanted, Rick all to herself, but the reality was far less glamorous. Their marriage began to crack almost immediately. Arguments over money filled their small home. Bills piled up, debt crept in, and the stress ate away at the picture-perfect life they thought they could build. The trust they once used to betray me turned against them. She doubted him, he resented her, and together they sank deeper into misery. I didn't need to watch closely. The whispers reached me anyway. Mutual friends who shook their heads, distant relatives who hinted at the chaos. It was all unfolding exactly as I knew it would. Rick and Vanessa had built their new life on lies, and lies have a way of collapsing under their own weight. As for me, I started over. There was fear in the beginning, of course, but also freedom. I no longer had to explain myself to anyone. No longer had to pretend my marriage was whole. I had resources, independence, and the strength I had found in my own silence. Every step I took forward was mine alone. Rick and Vanessa fought over what little they had, clinging to scraps of a future that was never solid. Meanwhile, I walked away with peace, security, and the knowledge that I had won without ever raising my voice. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, calculated, and final. They were left with each other, the very thing they chose, and it turned out to be their punishment. I was left with freedom, and that, more than anything, was the coldest revenge I could have served. I never forgave Rick, and I never forgave Vanessa. Some wounds cut too deep to ever be healed, and what they did to me wasn't something an apology could fix. But forgiveness wasn't something I needed anymore. What I needed was peace, and I finally found it in the life I rebuilt for myself. Rick and Vanessa stayed together, but their bond was nothing like what they had imagined. Two liars bound by the same betrayal, living in the ruins of their own choices. They couldn't escape the reality they created. Every argument, every sleepless night, every unpaid bill was a reminder that they had destroyed something good for nothing lasting. They had chosen each other, and that choice became their prison. I didn't care to keep track of the details anymore. Friends sometimes told me about the fights, the bitterness, the way their marriage crumbled under the weight of mistrust. But I never asked. I didn't need to. The picture was clear enough. Their punishment was simply being with each other, and I had no reason to involve myself in their misery. Meanwhile, my life slowly became my own again. I no longer lived in the shadow of someone else's lies. I built new routines, new friendships, and eventually a new sense of joy. At first, it was hard, waking up alone, eating dinner by myself, filling the silence in the evenings. But little by little, I discovered something I had lost long before Rick and Vanessa's betrayal. I discovered myself. There was strength in knowing I had survived something designed to break me. There was pride in the way I had handled it, quiet, steady, without lowering myself to their level. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't fight for scraps of their attention. I simply gathered the truth, took what was mine, and walked away. That was my revenge. And it was enough. Rick and Vanessa may have thought they won when they stood together at that altar. But in the end, they were left with nothing but each other's lies. I walked away free, stronger, and untouched by the chaos they created. Sometimes people think revenge has to be loud, dramatic, or cruel. But I learned the sweetest revenge doesn't need fire or fury. It doesn't need screaming matches or public battles. The sweetest revenge is silence. It's watching them choke on the choices they made while you move on, lighter and stronger than before. That was my final message, not to them, but to myself. I didn't need to carry their betrayal anymore. I didn't need to seek their pain. Life took care of that for me. All I needed to do was walk away. And so I did, free, whole, and finally at peace.